This is an emergency update. The world is about to go to war. 2024 is about to start off with a bang and unfortunately maybe end in a whimper. Conflict is exploding around the world in every possible theater in the last 24 hours. Social media has been completely frenetic. The news cycle is so rapid fire, I cannot even keep track of all the information, but I'm going to try to enumerate it in my usual bird's eye view fashion and try to connect the dots. But I tell you, man, we're broaching every possible tipping point, it appears, at the exact same time. And everybody that I've networked with over the last few years who's in the high profile, high net worth category, I can tell you all right now, they're unequivocally preparing for shit hit the fan. Okay, so if you aren't, then you're crazy. That's all I got to say. Now, before we get into all the data points, and there's many, just my summary is 2 pages long. And I'm going to try to rattle that off as quick as possible just to put in perspective what is happening and how rapidly it's happening. But first I want to share a small clip of this video with you. Now, typically videos like this that go viral right away on the first day that they're released, I don't put a whole lot of stock into them because later it usually comes out that either the person faked the video or it was just blown out of proportion. But this one, according to the comments that I've been reading on it, is true. To give you some context, the woman is in front of an undisclosed location outside of Washington, D.C. She claims that it's a set of government buildings that are typically quite shadowy, classified type buildings. And there's a loudspeaker playing the emergency broadcast message, insisting that this is just a test of the emergency system. It's not real world, don't worry. And it's playing that over and over on a loop. And she said that it was playing it over and over for several hours. Now, the authorities came out afterwards, according to one of the comments that I was reading, and said that this was just a glitch, okay? Now, that's a pretty big glitch. I could see maybe for 5-10 minutes, but for 2 hours to be blaring this message, and I'm reluctant to share the extended version with you because, number one, they're just saying the same thing over and over, but with a lot of these emergency broadcast messages, if you play them, and there's some sort of FCC law that if you, especially the one that's like, you can't actually legally play that. You can be fined, and not only you can be fined, but the platform that is hosting you can be fined. This isn't that. This seems like a more generic message, but it's just something to be mindful of that in the run-up to New Year's, many authorities around the world are worried about terrorist attacks. Now, terrorist attacks are not something I really lose sleep over. I'm not a big New Year's party guy, so I don't have to worry about that. I'm not going to be finding myself in a big crowd of people this year. So, and they're usually typically benign, isolated incidents. I'd be more worried about just global warfare ensuing, which it appears it's a given at this point. The Middle East is flaring up as we speak. The war has started. They're never going to officially delineate it with a declaration of war anymore, but it's begun. Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen. I mean, the whole shit's just going up in flames right now. Let me just play a little clip of this for you because this is suspicious in light of everything that we've been talking about, okay?
Is a test of the emergency.
Well, I was live and TikTok banned me. Not sure why.
There is no emergency
and
at this time.
Just wanted to show you guys still at
This is
4:10
only a test.
a.m. This has been going on for 2 hours.
Okay, so why the loudspeaker at these buildings, right? And why the test now? Or is it because they're implementing a new system? We know that in many countries around the world, they've been rolling out these emergency alert systems in the run-up to what will inevitably be a clash of multipolar world superpowers. But the fact that it was going for 2 hours, that's very concerning. You know, I mean, was this some sort of cyber attack? I don't know, but it's concerning to say the least. This is not one of those things that I would just chalk up to an overhyped big nothing burger. This is kind of different. Now, is it just, you know, part and parcel of the plans for continuity of government that are happening under the radar? It's very likely. Is it a sign that something is impending? At this point in time, every day I'm preparing for shit to hit the fan. And I can tell you that the people I know who are in the know, who are in the know in the sense that they're fairly well networked, fairly well apprised of what's going on. They are prepping like there's no tomorrow, okay? And these are very intelligent people who are, wealthy. They are very well networked, and if they're doing it, okay, if the wealthiest people among you, I mean, if Kim Kardashian has a nuclear fallout shelter bunker, and you still aren't prepping, then something's wrong. Not saying but that's almost like the litmus test. That's almost like the canary in the coal mine. If that level of celebrity is preparing for shit to hit the fan and you're not, and you're just waiting for some sort of social proof from these conformist lemmings, then my friend, something is wrong. You haven't been paying attention to this channel. Don't listen to Normalcy Norman. Listen to your gut right now. And your gut should be telling you that 2024 is going to be a wild ride, even if there wasn't an election. But the fact that there's going to be an election or possibly no election and a civil war is problematic. Now, let me go over this litany of SHTF data points. Number one, Russia accuses NATO of bombing Belgorod with illegal weapons. I repeat, Russia incurred its largest ever attack from Ukraine today, right after Ukraine incurred its largest ever attack. But the Russians are claiming that they were utilizing NATO weapons enabled by NATO, and not only that, commanded and overseen and provided ISR information in order to facilitate this attack. Okay, so they are saying that NATO has empowered Ukraine to kill Russian civilians inside Russia, not in the annexed territories, in Belgorod, utilizing banned weapons, cluster munitions. Okay, now in terms of international law, banned weapons, whether or not Ukraine was justified in doing what they did, I'm not even going to get into the politics of that, because one could say that, hey, you invaded Ukraine, then you got to expect some kind of blowback in the form of that country attacking you back. So regardless, Russia's making a big deal about this, and they're singling out the UK and the United States. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Let's just rattle off the data points. I'm going to try to strictly, in a very disciplined way, do that from here on in. Russia calls for an emergency meeting at the UN in response to this, which is currently ongoing, I should add. The US has opened an airstrip that was used in the Hiroshima bombings in World War II with China, just north of Guam. They've also installed 6 THAAD systems. These are anti-ballistic missile systems in Guam. Okay, so something is definitely being hatched in that neck of the woods. The F-16s, more evidence that they're already in Ukraine and being used to target Russian planes. If they're being used to target Russian planes successfully, then we got ourselves a potential nuclear escalation on our hands. We have Ukraine targeting Belgorod. As I indicated, we have Poland on high alert after Russian missile enters airspace. They've given up on the search for the missile, but they say that this was a missile who went through Polish airspace, came back around to Ukraine. I guess the Patriot missile defense system was sleeping at the time. This apparently attack on Ukraine was the largest ever Russian attack since the beginning of the war. 158 missiles, a combination of different missiles and drones. Still, this attack pales in comparison to just one day of bombardment of the Gaza Strip by the Israelis. But who's counting, right? The UK Defense Secretary says that UK is ready to go to war with the Russians. They're ready to mobilize thousands of troops on a moment's notice. And if you're wondering what's behind me, this is Yemen today. Okay, this is Yemen. Hundreds of thousands of people in the streets of Yemen ready to go to war with Israel. I tell you, the Middle East is about to flare up. There is no doubt in my mind that you're going to see a war with Lebanon, and that you're definitely going to see the entirety of the Middle East turn into a massive conflagration in the not so distant future, and it is going to drive commodity prices through the roof. We have South Korea getting ready to accept F-35s. The USA is deploying these F-35s all around the world, and I think the reason why is that when World War III starts, you want all of these countries who have the deployment mechanism to be ready to receive the tactical nukes that these things are going to carry. Because remember, when you have the deployment system, you're effectively apart. You're under the nuclear umbrella. You're considered a nuclear superpower by the opposition. So South Korea has now put a massive target on its back. It hasn't quite gotten the nuclear weapons yet, but it has the deployment system. And of course, the Americans are already there with their nukes anyways. Germany is talking about bringing back conscription. Biden is reiterating the threat that they will have to fight the Russians if Ukraine loses. Ukrainian accounts are threatening more terrorism. They're not using that word, but threatening more attacks on Russia in order to provoke the Russians in attacking NATO in order to get weapons from the West. Yes, you heard correct. They're basically now, and these are not official government, associated with Ukrainian government. These are the NATO guys, and they're threatening that more attacks are going to occur. And where there's smoke, there's fire, so they're probably not too far off the mark. They're saying that we're going to continue to provoke the Russians if the West doesn't give us the weapons that we want. Okay? So, and the weapons that we're going to need to push the Russians back in order to which will ultimately lead to the same end, which will be a Russian retaliation against NATO. And the former spokesperson, who now goes by S or Sarah Ashton Cirillo, I'll show you the clip in just a moment, is saying that by summer of 2024, they don't expect the Kerch Bridge to be standing. Okay, now if the Kerch Bridge is not standing in 2024, in the summer of 2024, then this thing is going to escalate wildly out of control, all right? We have USA deploying troops to Kosovo. I believe this is a regular rotation, but in light of the fact that what some people are calling Maidan Coup 2.0 underway in Serbia, that's certainly problematic. It looks like we might have another front opening up, and what we're likely to see is civil wars emerge throughout the Middle East, throughout Europe, and which will eventually take on the form of hot wars between nation states. We have France warning of terrorist attacks on New Year's. 100,000 police on alert and several thousand military as well. This is also the case in Germany, New York City, Chicago, Vienna, UK, all on high alert for New Year's Eve, because of course you're going to have these dense conglomerations of individuals in one place. They're going to be prime targets for terrorist attacks, or those flashbulb moments. I think right now in the current climate, if you were to get one of those, it would be very impactful in terms of foreign policy. We have a new fungus spreading in Israel. Apparently, one IDF soldier died as a result of this fungus, and 10 others were infected. We also have disease spreading wildly through the Gaza Strip, with hundreds of thousands succumbing to respiratory illness, as well as diarrhea and other illnesses, waterborne illnesses due to poor sanitation, lack of supplies, lack of healthcare, that sort of thing. So are we going to see a World War I scenario where you have war, you have trench warfare, you got the mice in the trenches just like you have in Ukraine, and maybe some new disease emerges from all of this? Speaking of disease, COVID is back again, and now they're saying that this new variant actually affects the heart. So it's going to lead to heart failure all around the world. I was going to leave that one. Let's just do no comment there. But it's not looking good. We have 250,000 Israelis have been evacuated from the Lebanese border. All right, so we know that war is coming there. Don't succumb to the normalcy bias. The same people, the same type of pundit who is saying that, Ukraine didn't have anything to worry about because Russia would never invade. Okay, it's a much more low intensity state of affairs than we're seeing right now on the Lebanese North Israeli border. It was much more chill there, and of course we know what happened. So knowing everything we know about what's happening in the untenable state of affairs in the Gaza Strip right now, we know that that front is going to go up in flames, okay? The war with Lebanon, Hezbollah, some people are saying it's going to first start as a civil war, which is going to spill over, and that's, the Israel intelligence and whoever is pro-Israel America in Lebanon is going to try to foment some sort of civil conflict there, and that's when the war is going to start. Among other things, we got Iran attacking U.S. bases. Across the Middle East, we have vice versa. Syria under attack from Israel. We have 11 IRGC officers assassinated. Okay, this was a pretty high-level attack. We also have Iran assassinating Israeli spies. All of this in the last 48 hours. Syrian oil fields under heavy bombardment. We have the Houthis attacking yet another ship again today. We have John Bolton calling for war with Iran, but what else is new? We have the Iranians sending weapons to Venezuela, so you can see the hardening and solidifying of the alliances on the Axis side of things. We have Venezuela running exercises to counter the British naval presence. We have unrealized losses by the U.S.'s biggest banks at the highest ever. We have the Fed's emergency lending at an all-time high. We have debt at an all-time high, gold at all-time highs, and that new COVID variant rearing its ugly head. And the planet is hotter than ever before than it's been since modern humans in the last 125,000 years. The Canadian geese have not migrated this year, and it's a sign of the times, all right? The deer aren't quite talking to me yet, as some people were joking, making reference to the movie Leave the World Behind. But if you're not prepping at this point in time, I'm telling you, every influential individual in the world is preparing for things to go awry right now. Now, if you're Warren Buffett or the late Charlie Munger, you might say to yourself, well, you know, when people are fearful, be greedy. And that maybe if fear is reaching an all-time high, maybe nothing is going to happen. But I think to the contrary, we're approaching so many tipping points at this point of time, and they're all coalescing at one point, it seems. And I don't know, I just got a real bad feeling, which is why every opportunity I have right now to convert whatever sort of zeros and ones on a screen that are in my possession into something tangible, I'm seizing on that opportunity, okay? So if that means making a Costco run, making a run to the wholesale food store, just getting whatever tangible things you can now, because this whole situation with the climactic shift up here, and we'll talk about that today, it's very strange, and I do believe that we're going to see some dire agricultural effects as a result of it. You can see here, red means anomaly, okay? So this is not one of those maps that has been fabricated to show red. And yeah, I think some of you guys know what I'm talking about. There's some maps that are circulating that some of the hardline climate activists use, and they embellish the details of which in order to in a more alarmist, sensational manner, try to communicate their point. But what this is an anomaly. So the redder, the deader. Okay, so the redder means that the anomaly it's not an indication of how warm it is there at this point in time. It's how warm relative to the average. And pretty much the entirety of the northern hemisphere, with the exception of Moscow and the Scandinavian states, including China as well, has been seeing record temperatures and just a lack of precipitation in numerous places, especially in the grain belts, which is problematic. So that's why you need to stock up on food. That's why the major countries of the world, the major consumers like India and China, they've either banned the exportation of foods or they are stockpiling it currently, because as war and all these things continue, it's only going to make the problems monumentally worse. Now, where should we begin here? So the situation in Belgorod is pretty serious, according to the Russians, because they are claiming in the days leading up to this now, okay, and this is what a lot of people are forgetting, that it wasn't only this recent attack. I can't remember the exact weapon system that the Russians are claiming was utilized. The Ukrainians are saying, oh, this is just a bunch of wayward, Russian air defense missiles that hit civilian targets. Now, to me, I could see that if there was maybe one or two of those things, but a lot of the Russian air defense systems are meant to self-destruct, so this doesn't happen. That it was happening in so many different places at once, it starts to look like this was a direct provocation in order to get some kind of response from the Russians that then would be used to justify bringing NATO into the conflict. So it's almost like Ukraine, and this is just one theory. I'm not saying this is 100%, but and this is what the NATO crowd is openly, explicitly stating on Twitter, they're saying that this was an intentional attack in order, and I'm not saying that, I'm saying that's what they're saying. This was an intentional attack in order to get the attention of the Western community, and that if you don't give us the weapons that we need, we're going to continue to poke the bear until the bear pokes back at NATO, which would, of course, require us to get involved at that point. So I don't know how much stock I put in that theory, but it's something to consider. Anyways, Russian air defense intercepted 3 American-made HARM anti-radar missiles over the territory of Belgorod. This was the day before this happened. Now, was that just a probing operation? In addition to the attack on Belgorod, most people don't realize that there were 70 drones that were sent out by Ukraine. They went to a variety of different regions, from Moscow to Tula. I believe Tula was the place where they had the airport shut down temporarily because the Ukrainians were targeting the bombers. These are the Beaver drones that have a 1,000 kilometer range, and they carry a substantial ordnance. So, and as well as the Bryansk region. So this was a large-scale coordinated attack. Now, the reason why this is different, now, and just to put it in perspective, this is an attack on Russia, okay? This is not the annexed territories. This is a direct attack. The Russians are saying NATO is complicit, and they're also saying that they're utilizing illegal weapons, which I don't really think the Russians care about. I don't think that's necessarily, they care about it in the sense of what sort of damage was done, but in terms of the sentiment of it, I don't think they're too concerned. They're very strategic thinkers. In addition to this, you have F-16s, according to Al Mayadeen, which is a Lebanese news source, and so take it with a grain of salt, and they're quoting a Belarusian military analyst, and this makes a lot of sense when you think about it. They're saying that the F-16s are already in Ukraine being used. Now, if they're already in Ukraine being used, then you would think that the Russians would have pinpointed where they're being where they're being deployed from, like what airstrips. So, assuming that they're being deployed from NATO airstrips, and assuming that what he's saying is true here, and that they're already being used to target Russian planes, which is why the Russians have lost so many planes, allegedly, in the past week. And the evidence, he suggests, is that the British sold 200 ASRAAM air-to-air missiles to Ukraine. Now, these ASRAAM missiles are, can only be deployed, as far as I know, I'm no military expert, specifically in the realm of the Air Force, they can only be deployed on F-16s and I believe Typhoon fighter jets, okay? Now, I know there was talks of getting Ukraine Typhoon fighter jets as well. I don't think they have them yet. But they can be deployed on F-16s. So why would you want these air-to-air surface missiles unless you already had F-16s? It's really starting to look, especially when you have Big Mouth Cirillo saying that the F-16s are already there before the end of the year. I think it's pretty clear that that's probably what has happened. But the concerning thing for me with all of this is that I know a lot of people, they continue to persist that, well, Russia has this in the bag. But if NATO is only barely fighting this fight with the support that they're giving to the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians are fighting with a hand tied behind their back, then you got to think that if the Russians are being held at bay to the extent that they are, with Ukraine having a hand tied behind its back, what happens when they unleash the dogs of war, okay? And so this is when the situation becomes very tense, the stakes get very high. If in fact the Russians are not doing as well as a lot of the Russia bros think, then we're in a lot of trouble, because it means we're only a hop, skip, and a jump away from somebody going unconventional and utilizing a nuclear weapon, all right? So, in fact, especially with what's going on in Poland right now, where they've given up on the search for this missile. Of course, there was no talk of Article 4, no talk of Article 5, and you know NATO is worried because they made this distinctly about Poland. There was very little talk about the missile hitting NATO territory this time. You had some news reports embellish it a little bit by saying a NATO country was hit with a missile, but in terms of the actual policy, surrounding mitigating the crisis, it was strictly left in the hands of Poland because they didn't want to trigger the Russians. Because they know, right, when they say Article 4, Russia's thinking about Article 5. And that's when, the doomsday planes are put into the air. It cannot go without saying that this was the largest ever Russian attack that triggered this Belgorod retaliation ever. 158 missiles, many of which successfully hit their targets. And they were able, and this is how you know the Russians are always thinking like in terms of chess. So they went for the Storm Shadow and Scalp cruise missiles storage, where they were stored in Ukraine. So they're not going to burn an attack like this. They're not going to waste it on just any old military base. They're going to try to go right to the source of the problem. And so that's allegedly what they did. And another confusing thing for me is that apparently they also were targeting some manufacturing facilities that the Ukrainians were using to build weapons. Now, the thing I can just not understand is why on earth would you be manufacturing weapons in Ukraine at this point in time, unless you're doing it subterranean? Because it just makes no sense, especially for these foreign investors. And we see these defense contractors get around Zelensky. Why on earth would you invest in this sort of thing if it wasn't just some sort of money laundering operation, as a friend of mine suspects, or if it wasn't just maybe a diversion or a decoy? Because as far as I know anyways, Ukraine, this is the frontier, and back in the Soviet era, I'm quite certain that there was an extensive network of underground bunker systems, which is probably why this war is so hard to fight, and which is probably why they're never going to really go into Kiev in that capacity, because of, whatever sort of underground networks. I mean, that was part of the problem with Bakhmut and Mariupol. So I can only imagine on a much larger city having to deal with that sort of subterranean combat. We're seeing how that's playing out in Israel, and it's not going too well for the Israelis. So there is very likely a large operation that's happening underground, I would presume. But apparently they were able to get some successful strikes on manufacturing facilities, but we'll never really know, because the only footage Ukraine ever releases and is allowed to release is civilian targets being hit in order to appeal to the international community. Now, we have the UK saying that they are preparing for war with Russia. Defense Secretary Grant Shapps says in a direct warning to Putin, the defense secretary said UK troops are fully armed and prepared to fight. War means that troops want to fight, but Russian forces are not up for it, he claims. That doesn't quite make sense, considering the Russians have one of the biggest armies in the world. And if you think about it, the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, and the Iranians all have the largest armies in the world, respectively, which is crazy that, countries like Germany, who can barely muster 200,000 troops, or the UK, which is probably even less than that, are making these insane threats, especially when one Sarmat missile with multiple warheads could completely wipe the United Kingdom off the map. But anyways, he says that thousands of British troops are ready to deploy within days, as the UK is now leading NATO's very high readiness joint task force. This is all while the Russians are blaming the UK for this attack, and the UK is talking about floating a bunch of ships in the Black Sea. Guys, there ain't much time left. Just keep on prepping, man, because the shizzy is about to hit the fizzy. This emergency meeting called by the UN Security Council, I don't even know why Russia continues to do this. I mean, I understand that they try to litigate to the best of their capability, and they claim to respect international law, but this is beating a dead horse at this point. The UN is just a hollow organization that is completely pointless at this point in time. That's become abundantly clear when you have countries like Israel who completely disregard it, but then they bring it up when it's relevant to them. Anyways, Germany is going to bring back conscription. Boris Pistorius is already talking about it. They're concerned that they can't get their numbers up. And of course, they're planning on going to war with the Russians and all this other crazy stuff, which is probably just going to end up being a drone war, unconventional, low-yield tactical nuclear war anyways. So maybe that's why they're not so concerned about bringing up enrollments, even though in the United States, We know that they've been boosting the amount of recruiters. I think they're talking like in the hundreds of new recruiters right now, but they're having a hard time. You got to get the economy to plummet enough to incentivize people to give it so that's the only job available, and then maybe you'll get some takers. Joe Biden has reiterated his warning that the U.S. will have to fight Russia if Ukraine falters in their efforts to reconquer territory. The USA has deployed troops to Kosovo. France is warning of terrorist attacks. They've deployed 90,000 officers for these New Year's festivities. I think if the concern was that high, why would you even hold these these festivities at this point in time? MI5 is rating the UK as having a very substantial risk of terrorist attacks. In Germany, Cologne's iconic cathedral is under close watch. Vienna is increasing patrols around festive events, and the New York NYC is tightening Times Square security with checkpoints and increased surveillance, as well as Chicago as well. This map right here signals another attack by the Houthis just off the Bab el-Mandab Strait. So this is an ongoing thing, in spite of the fact that a lot of the transport companies have begun to restart transporting through the Red Sea because of the warship escorts. They're still being attacked, and I think it's probably only a matter of time before they suspend activities there once again. Now, in terms of what's going on in Lebanon, the situation is pretty crazy, and it's a lot worse than we're being told, okay? There's 250,000 people on the Israeli side who've been evacuated. So this is something you would do in the run-up to a conflict. Again, don't succumb to the normalcy bias. If you're in that region and you're not 110% committed to the whole Zionist thing, then you might want to consider, packing up and jumping ship. And the same goes on the Lebanese side. If this is not a war you want to fight, don't wait for the final minute. You might want to get out of Dodge while the getting is good, because it seems like the situation is going to flare up there, especially when you have a hit put on the leader of Hezbollah, Nasrallah's head. It's only a matter of time before they have to initiate something, because, the clock is ticking. What else do we got going on here? Attacks on U.S. bases. I mean, more than we can count, just attack after attack. The war in the Middle East has started. I think it's as of January 1st, 2024, it's probably going to be official that it's begun, because there's just been so many attacks in the last 48 hours. I mean, airstrikes after airstrikes. The Russian anti-aircraft systems are taking down Israeli bombs, not the jets. And these are likely being manned by Syrian forces or IRGC-backed militias. So it's not as though the Russians are targeting Israeli planes yet, but we might be coming towards that point in the not-so-distant future. The Iranians are sending weapons to Venezuela. In addition to these anti-ship missiles that they're being sent, they're also shipping them they're also helping them build drones, but they're also shipping them these naval boats that they're going to use against the British Navy, I guess, if they eventually go to war with Guyana and the United States and the Brits get involved. So we got a war on pretty much every continent at this point in time. And that situation in Africa with Niger and Sudan, I mean, that could flare up at any time once again as well. Disease in Gaza. So in the Gaza Strip right now, they're going back to the 1800s. And, they're using, horse and carriage, donkey, it looks like, mule, whatever that is. And 180,000 people there have been stricken with upper respiratory infections, 130,000 with diarrhea, 55,000 cases of lice and scabies, 5,300 cases of chickenpox in just 12 weeks. Now, that's a significant portion of the population when you factor in, the 100,000 odd casualties. We're talking about 25% of the population directly affected by some sort of ailment related to the conflict. And it's likely only going to get worse. And of course, if this is spreading to Israeli soldiers, they're bringing it back to Israel. Who knows what sort of novel disease is going to emerge in these types of conditions, especially when you do have animals, in the mix, and you have zoonotic diseases jumping in and out of species. The situation can get out of control. If the rats in the trenches in Russia, Ukraine don't do it, then that certainly will. This is an interesting story. This girl is basically saying, she's in Ukraine, and she's talking about the new mobilization law. So she's saying as of January 10th, they're going to consider a new mobilization law. And I got to bring up Starship Troopers again, because if you remember in the movie Starship Troopers, they make the distinction between citizen and civilian. It takes place in this neo-fascist dystopian sci-fi future, and really it's just kind of a satire for modern warfare. But basically what she's saying is you're not going to be able to do anything unless you mobilize, unless you go and fight on the front lines. So you're not going to be able to buy things. You're not going to be able to have investments. You're probably not going to be able to get married and have kids and have a family either. Let's just see what she has to say. You'll be forbidden. What will be forbidden if you don't have a military ID? So you won't be able to go abroad. Okay, you can no longer sell real estate and other property. And this is what's coming here, guys. That's the scariest thing. You're not going to be able to drive a vehicle, all right? If you're stopped by the police and you don't have a military ID, you can't drive a car, great. You'll also be denied loans, denied public services, so probably no health care. And the coolest thing is, she's being sarcastic, you will have restrictions on your personal funds. Go to the bank and say, I want to withdraw my money that I've earned, and the bank will say, show me the military ID. And if you don't, yada, yada, yada. And anyways, so a lot of people in Ukraine are starting to not feel too good about a lot of these policies that are currently underway. And it's becoming more and more draconian, and the country has been completely destroyed. Depending on who you listen to, the amount of emigration from the country is possibly in the tens of millions. I don't think it's that high. I think on the conservative end, it's around 7 million people who've left. But some people are saying it's up to 20 million in terms of displaced people who've been killed, casualties in the war. That seems like a pretty high number, but, it's in such disarray. And then you have to also factor in how much of that has been absorbed by Russia of that initial 40 million population. Now, this is kind of funny. This guy, girl, whatever, is saying that by summer of 2024, the Kerch Bridge won't be standing.
Summer of 2024, it's going to be explosive out there. And it's going to be the Russians that are exploding.
What do you mean?
Well, I don't expect the Kerch Bridge to be standing in the summer of 2024. I don't expect Crimea to be in Russian hands at the end of our victory. Summer of 2024?
This guy says the craziest things, right? I don't know. He's like a 1930s propagandist. The 1930s called, they want their propaganda back, bro. Anyways, what else is going on? In the Denver airport, they've put up these new billboards, and I don't understand what sort of message they're trying to conceal. I get what they're trying to do. Okay, so if you guys don't know the backstory of the Denver airport, I think it's pretty common knowledge now that something is going on there, whether it's part of the continuity of government plan or not. I think what they've tried to do now is they're using this sort of a satire, these signs to kind of make light of the fact they got talking gargoyles and making fun of the fact that there's all sorts of conspiracy around what the actual purpose of the airport is, like it's in the shape of a swastika, all kinds of weird stuff. But I think what they're doing here is that if I was a betting man, I would say yes, there absolutely is something going on. Maybe not necessarily even under the Denver airport, but that it's a portal for something that goes maybe, underground, some subterranean complex that starts at the Denver airport because that's the central hub. It's central United States. It's where it's the fastest, it's the most accessible by the most amount of people from both East and West Coast. I'm not talking about you and me. I'm talking about the high rollers, right? Who are going to be living in this complex after World War III. And I think what it is, it's a portal, and there's not like a, you know, crazy sci-fi portal, like an actual, this is where the tunnels start. And the tunnels probably go under, let me just see here. Let's pull up the map. Let's pull up the map. If I was a betting man, because remember, there are secret government bunkers that we don't know where they are. Of course there is. So you have the mountains right here, right? And then you have the Denver airport in the shape of a swastika. Nothing to see there. And then at the Denver, and this might be some kind of weird nod to Baphomet or something. I don't know. It looks like some sort of goat's head or whatever. Anyways, I think that the tunneling technology is so good nowadays. What you would want to do if you were building something to survive the apocalypse, you could even have the entrance in plain sight. It wouldn't matter, because what you would likely do is you would tunnel miles away from that entry point. So even if your adversary knew, like even if the Russians have the Denver airport as one of their strategic targets, it wouldn't really matter, because the actual, you know, bomb shelter, nuclear fallout shelter is probably in the mountains somewhere, and that's just a portal to it. So I think a lot of this enciphering, this veiled messaging, this esoteric association between the reptoids, the reptiles, and the idea that this is part of a continuity of government plan is there to kind of demean and poke fun at it, but and also kind of make light of it, right? And just, haha, it's a big joke, like this one here where they say, thanks for being patient, the lizard people are stealing all our tools, to kind of, you know, associate the very sensible idea that there's a continuity of government plan that might be based around the Denver airport with shape-shifting lizards and all this crazy shit, right? So people just be like, that's crazy talk. Apologies for all the noise. It takes really big drills to get to the underworld. Like, I mean, they're just, maybe it's like a marketing gimmick. Forgive the mess. Building secret underground tunnels can get quite untidy. It's like in plain sight. They're showing you it. They're telling you the plan. And maybe, you know, when the smoke clears, they can be like, hey, we told you, you know, no, it wasn't a joke. We actually told you. The reptiles were assisting us. Anyways, I don't know, guys. I don't know what's going on. Now, let's just see here. So let's go over to the Eastern Theater, because this is what the Americans are up to in Guam. So in Guam, there's a lot of strange activity, because remember, the war with China and Taiwan and North Korea and South Korea is still coming. So in Guam, we have this island up here. This was the island. It had actually, this airstrip here had actually become overgrown. This was the airstrip that was used to send off the Anomaly, I believe. That was the name of the plane, to Hiroshima and Nagasaki and drop the atomic bomb. Now they've resurrected this airstrip for some reason. I guess this is going to be part of the containment measures for China. And they've also deployed more THAAD systems in and around Guam. So why would they be doing this at this point in time? Like, that almost seems like a strategic move to me. You know, that almost seems like they're getting ready for a possible nuclear attack on Guam or something. I don't know. But they're definitely starting to pre-position. They're starting to militarize the Philippines. They're moving all the pieces into position, and we're just going to have a war flare up at the same time on every front. Because as soon as one of these wars gets really, really hot, it's going to encourage these other theaters to take advantage of it. So if the U.S. gets pulled into a war with the Middle East, then the North Koreans and China is going to say, and who is being incredibly, eerily quiet right now, you'll notice, China's not saying anything. They're just arming up like there's no tomorrow. They're going to seize on that opportunity while we're preoccupied in Europe and the Middle East, and they're going to probably try to either militarily or try to foment some sort of coup with inside Taiwan, depending on which way the election goes. But it looks like no matter which way the election goes in Taiwan, the Americans are pretty deeply entrenched there politically, financially. So it's looking as though that the Chinese are going to have to make a move militarily at some point, and they've threatened to do so. There's been a lot of posturing in that direction, and of course, the North Korean peninsula needs no explanation with respect to how tense that situation is. So it's not looking good. This is the amount of money that the Fed has been lending. Okay, so here we are. This is 2023, I believe. This is December. Yeah, and so they've lent a lot of money since March. So look at how much money they've lent. $140 billion. That's what they're lending to banks. This is the amount of debt that we've accrued in the last 40 years. 7 trillion just from March 2020 to June 22. We're almost at 34 trillion. This is, and like I say, we're just broaching tipping point after tipping point. This is sea surface temperature anomaly in the last 10 years. Okay, so this is low temperatures. This is high temperatures. We're 5 degrees above average right now. We've broken every possible record. We were way up here at one point. Now we're still way above, like 5 degrees. So that situation's pretty crazy. We're at 1.7 degrees Celsius above the average. Remember, 1.5 used to be when they said, well, if we can't catch it at 1.5, there's going to be runaway effects and it's going to lead to the end of the world. Well, we're at 1.7 and they're saying we're not even going to be able to contain it under 2.5. And they say 3.5 is global cataclysm and possible human extinction. So yeah, the geese right now, I had a little TikTok video go slightly viral. You probably missed it on YouTube because YouTube doesn't seem to promote our shorts as much. But the birds, the geese, this is where I live right now. Today, plus temperatures once again, abnormally warm, 25 to 30 degrees above normal. No precipitation on the ground. This is going to have dire agricultural effects around the world. Food prices are going to skyrocket. And yeah, it's going to be an interesting year, which is why you got to lock in any commodity you can at this point in time, but that's not financial advice. And lastly, we have a new COVID variant. COVID scientists issue a warning. New variant could cause global heart failure pandemic. Japanese top research institute, Riken, has now issued a warning in the new report which states that the ACE2 receptors, which the coronavirus clings to within human cells, are very common in the heart. This means many people who catch the virus may suffer from reduced cardiac function. Well, is this why all the guys are dropping dead around the world? Let's not even go there. Let's not go there. I know you want to go there. I'm not going to go there. I can't get canceled yet, guys. There's too much, I mean, I got to stick with you to the end. We got to keep this show going until the bitter end. And the only way we do that is if we stay within that Overton window. And we just, we got to be careful because it's not over yet. All I can say is keep on prepping, man. I know what I'm doing tomorrow. I'm going to do a little supply run. Believe it or not, even the guy with the preparedness store does supply runs. Speaking of which, capitalize. I haven't taken that Boxing Day sale down yet. I'm being generous. I'm just going to wait till New Year's. And then I'm going to turn it off. Not because, we don't have enough to do around here, but I'm just trying to be generous. And I just want people to capitalize on that to the best of their capability. Stock up on food. See, I have my own personal supply of freeze-dried food and things of that nature, which I don't mix with the store. They're two separate things. Now, if shit hit the fan, yes, I have a store that I would, of course, need to defend with my brethren here, but at the same time, I try to keep it separate, and I want to pass that on to you, those savings, and because we were able to lock in a fairly good deal on a lot of freeze-dried foodstuffs that we purchased back in and around the Black Friday time period, and we're still, trying to pass those deals on, but seize on that opportunity, guys. 15% off store-wide, pretty much, with the exception of some bigger ticket items. So lock it in while you can, because I can tell you the smart money, that's what they're doing at this point in time. Everybody I know who's, you know, in a decent place, more affluent individuals that I know, and I don't know a whole lot, but, you know, being where I am in this public figure space, you start to know a few people. And I can tell you that anyone with half a brain and a few cents in the bank is doing exactly what we are doing. So you're on the right path. Unfortunately, we'll all be vindicated as these tipping points converge in the not so distant future. 2024 is going to be a wild year, even without an election. That it's an election season is just the icing on the cake. So seize the day, carpe diem, as they say, and stay tuned. We'll be back again tomorrow with likely more bad news, but I don't know, we'll see. Maybe, you know, maybe everybody will just start getting along at the onset of 2024, but I highly doubt it. Take care, guys.